My friend Ragan sobbed at my baby shower about her miscarriage 6 months ago and made it all about her. So I fed her a fake abuse story, and her mom exposed her in front of her entire trauma support group with baby photos, proving she'd been lying about everything. Ragan loves to retell my private trauma stories as her own. My essay as a child became hers when she wanted to confront her past in a college lecture. My cousin's near-death crash left her in a wheelchair for 6 months. At our friend's birthday, she used my house fire as a kid to explain why she couldn't go near candles. But when I told her that Jack and I were pregnant, Ragan's seemingly happy face had this hint of sour behind it. The next day, I made my announcement post, and within minutes, Ragan was flooding the comments with, "Congratulations, this reminds me I need to share something." She then wrote a novel reply to her own comment, all about how me having a baby reminds her of when her baby brother was born and her mom became abusive towards her, our friend Maya's experience. At my work lunch to celebrate, Ragan showed up uninvited, and when my boss made a toast, she started sobbing about how group celebrations triggered her because of the cult she escaped from. She monopolized the entire lunch describing rituals and brainwashing I recognized from a Netflix documentary we'd watched. I posted our gender reveal video, and within an hour, Ragan was live streaming herself having a panic attack about her stalker escalating. She told everyone she'd been getting death threats and found a tracking device on her car that morning. She talked about the roses left on the doorstep and the weird breathing on the voicemails. It was actually our coworker Jenna's story from 2 months ago. I was already on the edge of snapping at her when the baby shower snapped. Everything was perfect until the gifts. I actually thought Ragan wouldn't do anything. But then, as I was unwrapping a tiny onesie, I heard this sad whimpering coming from across the room. I turned around and saw Ragan with her head down sobbing. Her cries got louder and louder by the second. She wouldn't stop crying until everyone was paying attention to her, and my mom and sister were holding her hands. They asked her what's wrong, and after another minute of wiping her eyes and getting her breathing together, she managed to speak. "I'm so happy for you," she gasped between sobs. "But this reminds me so much of my baby boy. I miscarried him 6 months ago." Everyone went silent. My aunt asked why she'd never mentioned this before. "Because it happened 6 months ago," Ragan whimpered. "I was going to name him after my father, who died saving me when a man broke into our house." This was also Jenna's story. "I even had the nursery already. I just didn't want to burden anyone with my pain." Some of my family who hadn't ever met Ragan began consoling her immediately, taking her to the bathroom to talk to her. Some of my friends began offering their support and discussing how brave she was for coming here, given she had been through that. My baby shower ended up becoming her grief counseling session. Every photo has her red face in the background. She left early, so everyone spent the rest of the party discussing her loss instead of my actual baby. That night, I went to bed devastated, but woke up the next morning with a plan. If Ragan wanted attention, then she would get it. I started by telling Ragan that I had a secret I'd never shared with anyone. Her ears perked up, and she instantly invited me over to come talk. After a few dramatic gestures and sobs of not wanting to talk about it anymore, I spun this elaborate story about being abandoned at a fire station as a baby. I told her my mom isn't my real mom, she's my adoptive mom, and growing up, she hit me with belts and made me eat on the floor. I threw in real details from my actual childhood trauma that she'd already stolen and repurposed to make it sound more real. She consoled me and held me and promised my secret was safe with me, but I saw her eyes just light up. Within a week, she was dropping hints about having family secrets to anyone who'd listen. And at our friend's birthday dinner, she had a full breakdown. Through tears, she opened up to everyone about the story I had told her. The pieces were all coming together, and a few weeks later, it happened. You see, Ragan had started a trauma support group at the community center months earlier. I knew because she'd invited me repeatedly, saying it would help with our shared experiences. I told her mom Hannah about it and suggested she attend secretly to understand what her daughter was really doing. Hannah went for just one session, and it was enough to blow Ragan's life up. Hannah went dressed disguised, in a baggy shirt and even a wig. She sat in the back and listened. When Ragan's turn came, she did exactly as I suspected. She began telling the 15 people gathered the story I had spun to her. She talked opinally about how her adoptive mother had struck her with belts, how she made her sleep in closets, forced her to eat meals on the floor like an animal. She described scars on her back she didn't have and fears she'd never shown. She used exact phrases from my real trauma, words I'd only ever said to her. People from the group started crying. A few called her brave. They were just about to move on to the next person who'd like to share. When Hannah stood up, she took her wig off, and when Ragan saw her, she went pale as a ghost. "I gave birth to you," Hannah said, voice deadly calm. She pulled out her phone. "Here's the video. Here's your first birthday. Here's your 5th. Your high school graduation where I cried because I was so proud." She turned to the group. "I worked 3 jobs to give her everything. Never missed a recital or game. And now I'm hearing she's been telling you all I abused her?" The room exploded. People started pressing her for the truth. And that's when Ragan doubled down. She accused Hannah of being an imposter, someone her real mother had hired to discredit her. The support group members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, looking between mother and daughter with growing confusion and anger. I watched from my spot near the door as Ragan's world crumbled. Hannah pulled out photo after photo on her phone, passing it around the circle. Baby pictures, birthday parties, family vacations. Ragan at her college graduation with Hannah beaming beside her. The Christmas morning, Ragan got her first car, Hannah's proud smile in every frame. The group leader, a soft-spoken woman named Catherine, finally intervened. She asked Ragan to explain the discrepancies. Ragan's hands shook as she gripped the arms of her chair. She opened her mouth several times, but no words came out. The silence stretched unbearably long. One of the group members, a man who'd been coming for months, stood up abruptly. He'd shared his story of childhood neglect just last week, and Ragan had cried the hardest, relating it back to her own supposed abuse. Now his face was red with fury. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out without a word. 2 others followed. Ragan finally found her voice, launching into a rambling explanation about repressed memories and trauma responses. She claimed the photos were staged, that Hannah had forced her to smile for appearances. But her usual convincing tears wouldn't come. Her voice cracked and wavered. Hannah remained standing, calm and composed. She addressed the remaining group members directly, explaining that she'd come because she was worried about her daughter. She'd noticed Ragan telling increasingly elaborate stories that didn't match reality. She'd hoped to understand what was driving this behavior. The group leader suggested they take a break. People scattered to the hallway and bathroom, whispering among themselves. I followed a few members outside where they huddled together, comparing notes. They realized Ragan's stories often mirrored exactly what others had shared in previous sessions. The woman whose house had burned down recognized her story in Ragan's fear of candles. The man who'd escaped an actual cult saw his experiences reflected in Ragan's lunch disruption tale. When we reconvened, half the group hadn't returned. Ragan sat alone in her chair while Hannah had taken a seat across the circle. The group leader asked if anyone wanted to share their feelings about what had transpired. The floodgates opened. Person after person expressed their sense of betrayal. They'd opened up about their deepest traumas in what they thought was a safe space, only to have their experiences stolen and retold. A woman who'd actually been abandoned as a baby was particularly devastated. She'd found comfort in Ragan's supposed shared experience, had even met with her privately for coffee to discuss their parallel lives. Ragan tried to defend herself, but every explanation dug her deeper. She claimed she had a condition that made her absorb others' trauma. Then she said she was trying to help people by showing them they weren't alone. Finally, she accused everyone of ganging up on her, of not understanding the complexity of trauma responses. Hannah spoke up again, her voice heavy with exhaustion. She revealed that this wasn't the first time. Ragan had been doing this since high school. She'd gotten her kicked out of her first college when she claimed her roommate's eating disorder story as her own, causing a massive fallout in their dorm. Hannah had hoped it was a phase, had paid for therapy, but Ragan had convinced each therapist that Hannah was the delusional one. The session ended in chaos. The group leader announced that Ragan would no longer be welcome to facilitate or attend meetings. Ragan screamed that they were discriminating against her, that trauma manifested in different ways. But people were already leaving, shaking their heads, some crying from the betrayal. I slipped out during the commotion and waited in my car. Through the community center windows, I watched Ragan and Hannah in what appeared to be an intense confrontation. Ragan gestured wildly while Hannah stood with her arms crossed. Eventually, Ragan stormed out alone, her face blotchy and red. She didn't notice me in the parking lot. Over the next few days, the fallout spread like wildfire through our social circle. The support group members had connections throughout our community. The woman from the craft store where Ragan bought supplies for the baby shower gifts she'd never actually lost. The man who worked at the coffee shop where Ragan held court with her dramatic stories. Word traveled fast in our small town. Ragan tried damage control. She created a long social media post about how trauma could manifest in unexpected ways, how sometimes people unconsciously adopted others' stories as a coping mechanism. She claimed she was seeking help, that she recognized she had a problem, but the comment section told a different story. Person after person called her out with specific examples of stories she'd stolen. Maya was devastated when she learned Ragan had used her childhood abuse story at my pregnancy announcement. She confronted Ragan at the grocery store, right there in the cereal aisle. I heard about it from 3 different people who witnessed Maya's quiet fury as she told Ragan exactly what she thought of someone who would steal another person's deepest pain for attention. Jenna's reaction was even more intense. Learning that Ragan had appropriated her stalker experience and her father's death sent her into a rage I'd never seen before. She showed up at Ragan's apartment with printed screenshots of every time Ragan had retold her trauma. The confrontation was loud enough that neighbors called the building manager. Ragan's carefully constructed world of borrowed traumas was collapsing. Her book club asked her not to return after members compared notes and realized she'd been cycling through their personal stories for months. Oh wow, Hannah just pulled the ultimate mom move with those baby photos. Ragan's sitting there trying to claim the photos were staged while her mom's basically running a slideshow of, here's my daughter not being traumatized at Disney World. I can just picture Ragan frantically trying to explain how that birthday cake was actually a symbol of her deep emotional wounds. The yoga studio where she'd often broken down in tears during Shavasana, claiming various triggers, quietly removed her from their class schedules. But Ragan wasn't done fighting. She started a new narrative that she was being bullied, that cancel culture had come for her just because she'd made some mistakes. She tried to get people on her side by claiming I had orchestrated everything out of jealousy over her stealing attention at my baby shower. She even suggested that Hannah wasn't really her mother but an actress I'd hired. That's when things escalated further. Ragan showed up at my house unannounced on a Tuesday evening. Jack answered the door while I was in the kitchen making dinner. I heard her voice, high and frantic, demanding to speak with me. Jack tried to tell her it wasn't a good time, but she pushed past him into our living room. I found Ragan standing in my living room, her face flushed and eyes wild. She pointed an accusing finger at me while Jack positioned himself protectively between us. I set down the kitchen knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and walked slowly into the room, keeping my hands visible and movements calm. Ragan's whole body trembled as she launched into a tirade about betrayal and manipulation. She paced back and forth across our hardwood floor, her sneakers squeaking with each sharp turn. Jack moved to block her path to the hallway leading to our bedroom, where we'd been setting up the nursery. She noticed his defensive stance and laughed bitterly, throwing her hands up in exasperation. I watched her performance with a strange sense of detachment. She pulled out her phone and waved it around, showing us screenshot after screenshot of messages from former friends cutting ties with her. Her voice grew hoarse as she described how her entire life was falling apart because because of what I'd done. She claimed I'd poisoned everyone against her, that I'd been planning this for months out of jealousy. Jack remained silent but alert, his jaw clenched as Ragan continued her rant. She suddenly dropped to her knees on our carpet, clutching her stomach and rocking back and forth. The theatrical display might have worked on others, but we both recognized the manipulation. When neither of us moved to comfort her, she slowly got back to her feet, her expression shifting from anguish to cold fury. She announced that she knew the truth about my perfect life and threatened to expose secrets that would destroy everything I'd built. Her eyes darted around our living room, taking in the baby items we'd started accumulating, the prenatal vitamins on the coffee table, the parenting books stacked by the couch. Her gaze lingered on our wedding photo above the fireplace, and her lips curled into a sneer. The confrontation lasted nearly an hour. Ragan cycled through emotions like she was auditioning for different roles, trying to find the one that would crack our resolve. She sobbed about losing her support system, raged about the unfairness of it all, and even attempted to appeal to our past friendship. But we remained unmoved, letting her exhaust herself against our silence. Finally, she seemed to deflate. She gathered her purse and headed for the door, pausing to deliver one last warning about how this wasn't over. Jack followed her to ensure she actually left, then locked the door behind her and activated our security system. We spent the rest of the evening in tense silence, both processing what had just happened. The next morning brought a new wave of Ragan's retaliation. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media. She'd started a campaign to paint herself as the victim of a cruel conspiracy. She posted old photos of us together with lengthy captions about how I'd pretended to be her friend while secretly plotting against her. She claimed I was jealous of her authenticity and vulnerability in sharing her trauma. Her posts gained some traction among people who didn't know the full story. A few distant acquaintances reached out to ask what was really going on. I spent hours crafting careful responses, sticking to facts without engaging in the drama Ragan was trying to create. Jack suggested we document everything in case things escalated further, so I started taking screenshots and saving them in a folder. Ragan's mother, Hannah, called me that afternoon. Her voice sounded tired and defeated as she apologized for her daughter's behavior. She explained that Ragan had moved back home after being asked to leave her apartment due to the confrontation with Jenna. Hannah was struggling to manage Ragan's increasingly erratic behavior, while also dealing with the shame of learning how many people her daughter had hurt. Hannah revealed that she'd been doing her own investigation since the support group incident. She'd reached out to Ragan's former roommates, ex-boyfriends, and old coworkers. The pattern went back years, always the same. Ragan would infiltrate groups, absorb their stories, and eventually implode relationships when caught. Hannah had found at least a dozen people with similar experiences. Meanwhile, Ragan escalated her online attacks. She created multiple fake accounts to comment on my posts and those of our mutual friends. The comments ranged from subtle digs to outright accusations. She would post things like, "Some people can't handle others getting attention," or "Pregnancy hormones make people do crazy things." It was exhausting to keep up with blocking and reporting the accounts. Our friend group began to fracture under the pressure. Some people wanted to stay neutral, uncomfortable with taking sides in what they saw as a personal dispute. Others who had been directly affected by Ragan's lies stood firmly with me. The divide created tension at every social gathering. Birthday parties became awkward, with hosts having to choose who to invite. Group chats split into separate threads. Ragan showed up at my workplace during lunch hour. Security stopped her at the front desk, but not before she caused a scene that had everyone in the lobby staring. She loudly proclaimed that she needed to warn my coworkers about what kind of person I really was. My manager had to come down and threaten to call the police before she finally left. The incident left me shaking and embarrassed, even though my colleagues were supportive. That evening, Jack and I seriously discussed our options. We considered seeking a restraining order, but worried it might escalate things further. We upgraded our home security system and installed cameras around our property. Jack changed his work schedule so I wouldn't be home alone as often. The stress was affecting both of us, and I worried about how it might impact the pregnancy. Ragan's next move was to target Jack's family. She sent his mother a long message filled with lies about our relationship, claiming I was controlling and had isolated Jack from his friends. She suggested that the pregnancy was a trap to keep him tied to me. Fortunately, Jack's mother saw through the manipulation immediately and forwarded us the messages. She even called Ragan directly to tell her to stop harassing her family. The situation took an unexpected turn when Ragan's ex-boyfriend Nathan reached out to me. He dated Ragan for 2 years in college and had his own stories about her behavior. He explained how she'd gradually taken over his trauma narrative about losing his younger brother in a car accident. She'd told his story so many times that she'd convinced herself it was real, even visiting his brother's grave and leaving flowers. Nathan had tried to get Ragan help back then, but she'd turned their friend group against him by claiming he was emotionally abusive. Sound familiar? He'd spent years rebuilding his reputation and relationships. He offered to share his documentation if it would help, including text messages where Ragan admitted to borrowing his story because it resonated with her more than her own life did. Armed with this new information, Hannah confronted Ragan again. This confrontation happened in their family home, with Ragan's father present for the first time. He'd been largely absent from the situation, traveling for work and hoping it would resolve itself, but faced with evidence spanning years, he couldn't ignore it anymore. The family meeting lasted hours, with Ragan cycling through denials, justifications, and eventually angry accusations. Ragan's father insisted she get professional help. He researched therapists who specialized in personality disorders and made appointments, but Ragan refused to go, claiming everyone was ganging up on her because they couldn't handle her emotional depth. The arguments in their house grew so loud that neighbors started complaining. Hannah called me crying one night, unsure how to help her daughter who refused to admit she needed help. The drama spread to unexpected places. The community center where Ragan had run the support support group faced backlash from members who felt violated. Some threatened to sue for emotional distress. The center's director had to issue a public statement about their vetting process for group facilitators. They implemented new policies requiring background checks and references, directly resulting from Ragan's deception. Local therapists and counselors began warning each other about Ragan. Word spread through professional networks about her tendency to appropriate client stories and manipulate therapeutic relationships. Several therapists came forward with stories of Ragan attending their groups under false pretenses, gathering material for her performances. The mental health community in our town essentially blacklisted her. Ragan's social media presence became increasingly unhinged. She started live streaming at odd hours, creating elaborate narratives about persecution and betrayal. In one video, she claimed to be packing for witness protection because her truth-telling had put her in danger. In another, she suggested that multiple people in town were paid actors hired to discredit her. Her follower count dwindled as even strangers recognized the instability. I received a call from Catherine, the support group leader, asking if I'd be willing to help create resources for other groups to identify and handle similar situations. She'd been researching what she called trauma theft and found it was more common than people realized. We spent an afternoon discussing warning signs and protection strategies. It felt good to channel the negative experience into something potentially helpful for others. Ragan attempted to infiltrate other support groups in neighboring towns, but word had spread through the regional network of facilitators. She was recognized and politely asked to leave from 3 different groups. Each rejection seemed to fuel her narrative of persecution. She started a blog called Silenced Survivor, where she portrayed herself as a victim of coordinated harassment for being too real about trauma. The blog attracted a small following of people who related to feeling misunderstood or rejected. Ragan cultivated this audience carefully, sharing just enough truth mixed with her fabrications to seem credible. She began soliciting donations for her legal fund to fight the defamation she claimed to be experiencing. Hannah discovered this and was horrified that Ragan was now potentially scamming strangers online. Jack's protective instincts went into overdrive as my pregnancy progressed. He installed an app on both our phones that shared our locations constantly. He started accompanying me to all appointments and errands, worried about potential confrontations. While I appreciated his concern, the constant vigilance was exhausting. We both jumped at unexpected doorbells and checked our security cameras obsessively. I mean, if people were getting paid to deal with her drama, where do I sign up for that job? The fact that she started a blog called Silenced Survivor while literally live streaming to anyone who would watch is the kind of irony you can't make up. And now she's asking for donations, which is like watching someone charge admission to their own meltdown. Ragan's attempts to maintain her false narratives became increasingly desperate. She showed up at Maya's workplace with flowers and an apology letter, but Maya refused to accept them. The letter, which Maya later shared with me, was a masterpiece of manipulation. Ragan apologized for unconsciously channeling Maya's pain, while simultaneously suggesting that Maya should be flattered that her story had inspired Ragan's healing journey. Our mutual friend circle continued to navigate the awkward dynamics. Some friends tried to organize events that neither Ragan nor I would attend, creating a strange social calendar where people had to check who was invited before accepting. Others gave up on group events entirely, preferring one-on-one meetups to avoid potential drama. The community Ragan had once been so eager to be part of was fracturing because of her actions. Ragan's parents reached a breaking point. Her father gave her an ultimatum: seek professional help or find somewhere else to live. Ragan chose to leave, couch surfing between the few acquaintances who still believed her version of events. Hannah kept me updated through tearful phone calls, devastated by her inability to help her daughter, while also recognizing the need for boundaries. The stress of the situation triggered unexpected pregnancy complications. During a routine checkup, my blood pressure was dangerously high. My doctor ordered immediate bed rest and stress reduction. Jack took time off work to care for me, and we had to tell our families about the full extent of what had been happening. The revelation that Ragan's harassment was potentially endangering the baby shifted everyone's perspective. Jack's normally calm demeanor cracked. He sent Ragan a single message stating that if her behavior resulted in harm to me or our baby, he would pursue every legal option available. He didn't threaten or rage, just stated facts in cold, clear terms. Ragan screenshot the message and posted it as evidence of threats against her, but the response wasn't what she expected. People pointed out that Jack was simply protecting his family. Hannah made a difficult decision. She began reaching out to everyone she knew Ragan had hurt, apologizing personally, and offering to corroborate their experiences if needed. It was a painful process that took weeks. She heard story after story of her daughter's deceptions, each one adding to her guilt and grief, but she felt it was necessary to acknowledge the harm Ragan had caused and try to make whatever amends were possible. Ragan's few remaining supporters began to distance themselves as her stories became increasingly contradictory. She would tell one person she was staying with friends while telling another she was homeless. She claimed to have a job interview at a prestigious company while simultaneously posting about being blacklisted from employment. The lies piled up until even her most loyal defenders couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. The morning after Jack sent his message to Ragan, we woke to find our front lawn covered in printed screenshots. Hundreds of pages scattered across the grass, all showing conversations Ragan claimed proved I was manipulating everyone. Jack gathered them into garbage bags while I watched from the window, my hands resting on my growing belly. Our neighbor came out to help, shaking his head at the mess. Ragan's blog posts became increasingly frantic. She wrote lengthy entries about psychological warfare and gaslighting, using terms she'd clearly Googled but didn't understand. Catherine forwarded me links, concerned about the escalating rhetoric. The posts jumped between claiming she was being stalked by my minions and announcing she was starting her own trauma recovery center to help others who'd been silenced by their communities. lies. Hannah discovered Ragan had been applying for jobs using fabricated credentials. She'd listed the support group facilitation as professional counseling experience and claimed certifications she didn't have. When Hannah confronted her about it during one of Ragan's brief returns home to gather belongings, Ragan grabbed a suitcase and left without explanation. Hannah found rejection letters in Ragan's old room from 3 different mental health organizations. The community center received multiple inquiries about Ragan's new trauma recovery center. Catherine fielded calls from confused people who'd seen Ragan's online advertisements promising revolutionary healing techniques. The center's director had to issue another statement clarifying that Ragan had no affiliation with their organization and wasn't qualified to provide mental health services. Maya encountered Ragan at the pharmacy while picking up prescriptions. Ragan approached her with arms open for a hug, acting as if nothing had happened. Maya stepped back and walked to a different aisle. Ragan followed, loudly proclaiming that Maya was participating in a harassment campaign. The pharmacist had to intervene when Ragan wouldn't stop following Maya around the store. Jack's mother called to inform us that Ragan had shown up at her book club meeting. She'd introduced herself as a trauma counselor and offered to lead a session on healing from family betrayal. The book club members, unaware of the situation, had almost agreed before Jack's mother recognized her and quietly informed the host. Ragan left when asked, but not before distributing flyers for her fictitious trauma center. I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize. She'd found my contact information through mutual connections and wanted to warn me that Ragan was using my name in her promotional materials. According to the email, Ragan was claiming I was a success story from her counseling practice, someone she'd helped overcome severe childhood trauma. The woman had attended one of Ragan's sessions in someone's living room before realizing something was off. Nathan compiled a comprehensive document of Ragan's patterns dating back to college. He'd connected with other ex-partners and former friends, creating a timeline of her deceptions. The document revealed she'd claimed to have survived cancer, lost siblings in accidents, escaped human trafficking, and survived a school shooting, all stories stolen from people she'd met. He shared it with Hannah, who broke down reading the extent of her daughter's fabrications. Ragan's attempts to establish her trauma center grew more elaborate. She created professional-looking websites and social media pages, stealing content from legitimate therapy resources. She scheduled healing circles in public parks, showing up with folding chairs and sign-up sheets. When few people attended, she'd photograph the empty chairs and post about how the establishment was preventing people from accessing her help. During my next prenatal appointment, my doctor expressed continued concern about my stress levels. My blood pressure remained elevated despite bed rest. Jack took photos of the monitoring equipment to document the medical impact of Ragan's harassment. We started keeping a detailed log of every incident, creating a paper trail should we need it for protective orders. Ragan began leaving items at our doorstep. First came a baby blanket with a note claiming it was for the child who would grow up without knowing real love. Then self-help books about narcissistic personality disorder, with specific passages highlighted. Jack installed a motion-activated camera that captured Ragan placing these items in the early morning hours, always looking around nervously before hurrying away. The situation reached a turning point when Ragan targeted the pregnancy center where I'd been receiving care. She called claiming to be a concerned family member, suggesting I was an unfit mother with a history of violence. The center's staff recognized the false allegations and contacted me immediately. They'd dealt with similar situations before and had protocols in place, but it meant extra security measures for my appointments. Hannah made the difficult decision to change her locks after discovering Ragan had been entering the house while her parents were at work. Security footage showed Ragan removing family photos and documents, presumably to use as evidence in her ongoing campaign. Hannah found some of these items photographed on Ragan's blog, presented out of context to support her false narratives. Catherine organized a meeting for all the support group facilitators in the region. They developed new screening procedures and warning systems to prevent similar situations. Ragan's photo and information were discreetly shared among mental health professionals and community organizations. It wasn't a formal ban, but rather a protective measure for vulnerable populations seeking legitimate help. Ragan's few remaining supporters gradually recognized the patterns. A woman who'd been letting Ragan couch surf contacted Hannah after catching Ragan practicing different trauma stories in front of a mirror. She'd overheard Ragan rehearsing details from the woman's own miscarriage experience, adapting it as her own story. The woman asked Ragan to leave immediately. Our friends started taking more active roles in protecting our peace. They created a schedule to check on us, bringing groceries so I could maintain bed rest. Someone was always available to accompany me to appointments. The community that Ragan had tried to turn against me instead formed a protective circle, though we were careful to keep everything legal and documented. Ragan's online presence shifted to attacking the mental health profession itself. She claimed therapists were gatekeepers preventing real healing, that support groups were cults designed to silence truth tellers. Her posts became increasingly conspiratorial, suggesting a coordinated effort by the therapy industrial complex to discredit her revolutionary approaches to trauma healing. The breaking point came when Ragan attempted to infiltrate a pregnancy support group I attended. She arrived claiming to be newly pregnant and grieving a previous loss. The facilitator, who'd been warned about her, gently but firmly asked her to leave. Ragan refused, insisting she had every right to be there. Security had to escort her out while she shouted about discrimination and threatened lawsuits she couldn't afford to file. Hannah and her husband made the painful decision to sell their house. The stress of Ragan's behavior, combined with the constant drama in their neighborhood, had become unbearable. They found a smaller place in a different part of town, hoping distance might help. Ragan discovered their plans and accused them of abandoning her, but they proceeded with the move anyway. Maya, Jenna, and several others who'd been affected by Ragan's lies decided to meet regularly for their own support. They gathered weekly at a coffee shop workshop, not to rehash Ragan's betrayals, but to rebuild the trust she'd damaged. These meetings became a source of genuine healing, something Ragan's manufactured drama could never provide. Ragan's behavior became increasingly erratic as her support system completely dissolved. She was spotted at various churches and community organizations, each time with a new story and a new crisis. But word had spread effectively through the community grapevine. People were polite but wary, no longer falling for her elaborate performances. My stress levels finally began to decrease as Ragan's ability to disrupt our lives diminished. The baby's heartbeat remained strong at each checkup, and my blood pressure slowly returned to normal ranges. Jack maintained his vigilant protection, but we both felt the storm beginning to pass as Ragan's influence waned. The final incident occurred when Ragan appeared at a town hall meeting about mental health resources. She's literally practicing different trauma stories in front of a mirror like she's rehearsing for a one-woman show is just, wow, how much more of a loser can you be? She stood during public comment, attempting to present herself as an advocate for trauma survivors failed by the system, but her rambling statement, full of contradictions and accusations, only reinforced the community's decision to distance themselves from her. She left before the meeting ended, and that was the last time most of us saw her. 3 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Hannah sent a congratulations card with a simple message about new beginnings. She joined a support group for parents of adult children with behavioral issues, finding solace among others who understood her struggle. Maya and Jenna became regular visitors, and our friendship grew stronger through shared understanding rather than stolen stories. Ragan had moved to another state according to Hannah's occasional updates, starting fresh where no one knew her history. Our community slowly healed from the disruption, implementing safeguards to protect vulnerable people seeking help. Life moved forward, quieter but wiser, with the hard-earned knowledge that some people's need for attention can cause real harm, and that protecting our own peace sometimes means letting go completely. I love how she just rambled on with her made-up accusations while everyone probably sat there thinking, yeah, we all know about you already. I really enjoyed this story, and I hope you guys did too. Subscribe for more videos like this.